Hello everyone, and welcome to Bill Brick 09's complete review of the X-Files Season 10 miniseries, whatever you want to call it. Today I'll be giving a very brief description of each episode, telling you my thoughts, and giving each episode a rating. At the end I'll calculate the average of all my ratings and tell you my thoughts on the season as a whole. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, so let me know what you thought in the comments at the end of the video. There will be some spoilers, so leave now if you haven't seen the show yet. You gone? Okay, here we go. Episode 1. My Struggle Pathology episode. After 14 years off the air, everyone was expecting the first new X-Files episode to be absolutely amazing. Boy, were we wrong. This terrible episode makes absolutely no sense, is flat out boring, and basically makes the last 9 years of the X-Files kind of unnecessary. I can really only think of two things to praise about this episode. The opening scene does a good job recapping the events of the series for newcomers and viewers who haven't seen the series for a while, and the special effects are the best we've probably ever seen in an X-Files episode. This unfortunately doesn't make up for the poor excuse of a plot we get in this episode. I'm going to be really blunt and say this was one of the worst 5 episodes of the series ever. Yes, it's that bad. And don't just take my word for it. You'll have a hard time finding a positive review for this episode on Rotten Tomatoes or anywhere else on the internet. This episode gets a 3 out of 10. And I certainly hope they use Walter Skinner and the Smoking Man more than they did in this episode. Let's move on. Episode 2, Founder's Mutation, Monster of the Week episode. This episode starts out with a fairly intriguing cold open where an employee experiences painful ringing in the ears and eventually finds a way to take care of it. I'll just say it's not for the faint-hearted. However, the episode soon descends into a moderately nonsensical plot that is frequently disturbing and upsetting. One scene shows a hospital hallway full of child patients who have serious birth defects, many of which are extremely disturbing and hard to unsee. There's also a scene close to the beginning that's not exactly children's content. The episode does feature some pretty cool practical effects and a mediocre plot, as well as some of the most disturbing material the show has ever offered, however. It also brings up the question of William, Scully's son, who is introduced towards the end of the series proper. Overall, it is certainly better than the awful first episode and gets a 5 out of 10. Episode 3. Mulder and Scully meet the Were-Monster, Monster of the Week episode. After the disappointing first 2 episodes, Mulder and Scully meet the Were-Monster was certainly a step in the right direction. Some have even deemed it an instant classic. I wouldn't go quite so far, though. The episode offers a very interesting twist on the cliched werewolf story and features a good performance by guest actor Rhys Darby. It's also nice to see an actual monster and have a few laughs in this comedic episode. I have a couple issues with it, however. First and foremost, it is probably the most inappropriate X-Files episode to date, featuring several references and scenes that were quite unexpected. I understand this isn't a kid's show, but for the most part I would classify it a family show. Except for Home and, well, this one. This episode really pushed that bar, though, and was one of only a handful of episodes to do so. There's also simply too many scenes of men in underwear in this episode. Overall, if you can get over these complaints, it is a good episode, however, and gets a 7 out of 10. Episode 4, Home Again, Monster of the Week episode. This episode centers around a Band-Aid Nose Man. Yes, that is his name, I did not make that up. That goes around brutally killing anyone who tries to bother the homeless. In addition, about half the episode is devoted to a side plot revolving around Scully's mother having a heart attack. I would consider this an average X-Files episode. It's a little creepy, a little thought-provoking, and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but is moderately entertaining nonetheless. The episode also continues the subplot of the fate of William. Overall, nothing spectacular, but nothing particularly bad either. This episode gets a 6 out of 10. Episode 5, Babylon, Monster of the Week episode. Oh boy, where to begin? This is one strange episode. For starters, there's no monster or even anything that creepy about this episode. It focuses on the agent's attempts to bring a suicide bomber out of a coma and takes some really weird twists and turns along the way. First of all, 2 new agents who are like dull, discount clones of Mulder and Scully are thrown into the mix. Didn't we already try this with Doggett and Reyes to mass disappointment? Personally, I think these new ones seem way more unlikable than the aforementioned ones. The story delves deep into religion. A little too deep, perhaps. It's obvious that the show's creators are trying to promote world peace by uniting religions. In the process, however, I think they managed to include elements that could offend both of the mentioned parties. I don't really want to get into specifics here, but there's a few analogies and such that are made that I think could bother both parties. A show like this really has no business trying to get into religion or politics, in my opinion, especially for a 6-episode run that should be chock full of other things like monsters and aliens. True, it is nice to get something different every once in a while, but not this. There's some entertaining elements in this episode, like some awesome cameos and a few humorous, albeit odd and morally questionable bits, but overall this episode is so utterly strange, repetitive, and poorly executed that it gets a 3.5 out of 10. Episode 6, My Struggle 2, Mythology episode. This episode is a continuation of the awful pilot, My Struggle. If nothing else, it's at least better than that episode. We can see a lot more of Cancer Man, get a cameo from Monica Reyes, and get an overall better structured and more interesting episode. However, it still has many flaws. For instance, the annoying agents are back and almost take over the episode. We want Mulder and Scully, not these two discount clones of them people. It's like margarine compared to butter times 10. Sorry for the food analogy. The ending is also a major problem with this episode. While in and of itself it's not bad, it's a terrible way to end a series that may not ever air on TV again. The whole subplot of William also felt very tacked on at the end. As of yet, Chris Carter and co. have not officially announced that they will be making any more episodes. In fact, Chris Carter himself said that he has other projects he would like to work on first. Even if they do, it will probably be at least a year, probably more, before they are aired, which is a much longer amount of time than the gap between seasons of normal TV shows. And where's Skinner? I thought he'd be in this miniseries way more. And don't even get me started on the immortal Cancer Man. Sure, I'm glad he was back, but how could anyone survive a lifetime of constant smoking, being pushed down a staircase in a wheelchair in old age, and being incinerated in a deserted temple? Despite these flaws, it was probably one of the top 2 episodes in the miniseries, but that's not saying a whole lot. It gets a 6 out of 10. I calculated the average rating out of all 6 episodes, for me, and ended up with a score of about 5.1. Unfortunately, that's a fail. A big fail. While there are a couple of decent episodes strewn throughout this short run, the X-Files Season 10 was mostly a flop. Although not everyone hated some of the episodes to the extent that I did, it seems that no one thought this miniseries was anything exceptional, and most people hated My Struggle 2 even more than I did. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure I even want another X-Files miniseries or series. At this point, I'd say wrap it up with a solid feature film with tons of creative energy put into it, and then call it quits. For good. No more. Even a TV movie would suffice. The final seasons, the second movie, and this are giving the X-Files a bad name for an amazing TV show in the past. Let's remember the past fondly before it's too late. Now, if you're new to the X-Files, don't get me wrong, and don't let this review dissuade you from checking out the show. I still think it's one of the best, if not the best TV shows of all time. It's just that 14 years of stagnation didn't seem to do it too much good. What did you think of the X-Files Season 10? What was your favorite episode? Are you hoping for a new season or film sometime in the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to check out my top 10 X-Files episodes list as well. As always, thanks for watching, liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and I will see you next time. Oh, and if anyone asks,